Could you make my earthquake? Make my earthquake. I'm still fresh off that concert, so I'm still feeling it all right now.
I'm feeling it. Keep going.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, that's enough because I think you can get sued for singing too long of an excerpt as well as playing too long of an excerpt. Okay. Anyway, I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, true and real stories from the fringes of classical music. Shout out to GoldLink, to Jaden Smith, and to Tyler the Creator for an amazing show last night at the Armory in Minneapolis. Really great sets, really hype audience. I felt a little old in that crowd, actually.
At 32, you felt old.
A lot of the folks at that show had the X's marked on their hands, saying that. So the line at the bar was always very short, which I'm thankful for.
How was the line at the bathroom?
Oh, I didn't even go in the bathroom. The music the whole time. I didn't want to miss a single moment. Oh my gosh, I'll have to show you my
photos. I saw some of the videos on Instagram, and it looked packed. I mean, you could hear everybody singing along with Earthquake. Plainly.
Yeah, it feels so good to. Because I listen to so much, I live so much of my life in solitude, so when I listen to this music and stuff, I'm doing it by myself. So it's weird to be in a crowd of thousands and everyone knows all of this music as well as you do.
You thought it was something personal. You thought that he recorded that for you.
Well, not necessarily that, but there's just that feeling, of being in a room of people that really appreciate all of that music. And before we move on from that, I have to say that during Jaden Smith's set, he kept calling Tyler his boyfriend, and I don't know if that's true or not. And of course, the album that Tyler the Creator did for this tour, Igor, is about a breakup of his. But the more you listen through the album and the closer you listen, you realize he's talking about a guy. He's not talking about a woman that he broke up with. Mm-hmm. So, the space felt very, it wasn't like a queer space. It wasn't like that, but it definitely felt just more inclusive in a natural way. There weren't rainbow flags anywhere or anything like that, but it just felt like no one was gonna beat me up if Dale gave me a kiss or something. It's a level of inclusion and equity that they figured out how to make exist in that corner of hip hop. And that's what we're trying to do here, right?
So really, it seems like Tyler the Creator is sort of pointing in a direction of where this music should be going now.
Right.
And more inclusivity, things that obviously there were white folks there, right?
Mostly white. And that was the other weird thing about living in Minnesota. You go to a rap show and it's mostly white folks, but it's cool. And I don't want to make it sound like Tyler the Creator and Jaden Smith and also GoldLink, who opened up the show, that they're making these active, intentional efforts toward that sort of inclusion as much as they're just presenting themselves authentically. And for Tyler the Creator, a part of that authentic presentation of himself is telling the story about how he went through a breakup with a young man. So
I like that.
Yeah, so shout out to him. If you've never listened to any Tyler, I highly recommend the album Igor, Igor. It's very much hip hop, but it has a lot of like chill vibe and cool vibe and jazz influence and all that stuff. I think it's a great intro hip hop album if you don't listen to much hip hop.
That's the key word there that I want to touch on is album.
Yeah.
Album, because not many people are making albums anymore. They're doing a single, so that they can get that out on iTunes or whatever. And then they sort of have some BS things that sort of fill out the rest of the release. So talk a little bit about Igor as an album.
Well, and I will also talk about this in relation to Beyonce, whose birthday it is today, as we're airing
I thought we were
this.
going to get away without mentioning Beyonce once.
Yeah, so you're saying TRILLOQUY listeners have like a bingo and like mentioning Beyonce is on there? Well, fine. You're going to win bingo today. So with Igor, with Beyonce's, not her latest album, but the one before that, Lemonade, and another, I can name artists all day, how from beginning to end, you're telling a story. 25 by Adele, beginning to end, a story is being told. So it's not just a collection of pieces, one song right after another. This song has something to do with the next song, and then it kind of evolves in many ways like a symphony. But I kind of have to say more contemporary symphonies, because that sort of hodgepodge, that one after another thing you're talking about, it, from my perspective, is more pronounced in like the old classical era symphony, and maybe even some of the early romantic era symphonies.
Well, like Franz Liszt, he wrote his symphonic tone poems.
Right, so that music tells a story.
Yeah, and
right.
and it goes from different tempos and such with it seamlessly. It'll go from one to the other. And isn't it Rachmaninoff, his third piano concerto, that goes seamlessly from front to back?
It does, but I think more of what you're thinking of, the end of the second piano concerto, if you played the end of the second and the beginning of the first, those flow together.
Oh, cool.
Into one.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so a lot of composers had that in their mind, as do or as should authors. Today we're going to talk about a couple books. My interview today is with Cameren Williams. She wrote a children's book called Kinderlute that is actually, there's a digital version of it at yourclassical.org if you want to check that out. I met Cameren at Sphinx this past February. She presented the book to an event that I hosted called Sphinx Tank, where people are, talking with sharks and trying to get funding for a project. She didn't win that funding, that project, but I was so moved by her presentation that I knew that the folks here at Your Classical, we needed to showcase her, and I knew I wanted to interview her for a Trilloquy. So that will be the interview for today. But first, I want to talk about another book called Black Horn. So, I went to the Gateways Festival, about a month ago, and one of the big things I did, I hosted a panel discussion with the author of Black Horn. His name is Bob Watt. He was the first black person to win a spot with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and he just sort of recounts, from the beginning of his life all the way to today. He's retired from the LA Phil, but he's still playing. He does a lot of talks around the country and around the world. Really phenomenal guy. And I chose a few topics from his story for us to dive into today. So you ready for that?
I'm ready.
So toward the beginning of his life, and in the beginning of the book, he talks about his dad, who was a jazz musician, just playing gigs here and there, and how the culture of jazz and jazz musicians has a lot to do, at least in those days, with sex and sexuality. Even the word jazz is pretty close to a sexual slang word that we still use today.
Mm-hmm.
If I say it, will you bleep me? Well, I won't say it.
Let's find out.
But anyway, it sounds a lot like jizz, right? But just like scat is a jazz thing and also a sexual thing. So, he talks a lot about those correlations. And there was this one jazz guy who would just always sit on the stoop in his neighborhood. I think his name was Jones or something. They called him Jones. And Bob Watt would walk past him every day going to school, and he would give him sort of mini birds and the bees talks. Mm-hmm. Along the way. And one of the things he talked about was, and again, if you want, the real account, read the book. I'm not making this up. I'm just, he talks about how white women are going to want Bob's body after he goes through puberty, and how after he begins to, his body begins to grow in a certain way, and his he comes into himself as a man, how a lot of white women are going to find that exotic and different. And we're talking about the 40s and 50s. So, segregation was still very much a thing, even in New Jersey, where he lived. And so that mystery and exoticism still lived. So I'm like, okay, so a few chapters later, he goes into the story about a substitute teacher that, feels sorry for him, sees him walking miles to school in the snow, carrying this big French horn case, so starts giving him rides home. And eventually the substitute teacher starts hitting on this, 16, 17-year-old high school student. And
so that's been going on for a long time,
too. A long time. And in the book, he says that he, always turned down the advances. But in real life, he told me that the publisher just didn't want him to put that in the book, but that he had the teacher many, many, many times.
Whoa.
So what? So let's sit with that for a minute. The idea of this young black student being coerced into sex by this, older white substitute teacher, after having been told by someone in the community that, oh, these white women are going to see your body as exotic, and they're gonna be going after you.
It doesn't sound to me like it was coercion.
What do you mean?
You said he was coerced into sex with a substitute teacher.
I mean, but what 17-year-old straight boy doesn't want to tell the story of, oh, I smashed the teacher last night? I mean, was that something you ever? I'm gonna put you on the spot.
I'm trying to think.
I mean, that certainly wasn't the case for me, and a teacher never came on to me. But I just think that was just a really interesting thing for him to put into his musical story, the story of his musical upbringing.
Well, I was curious about how often, if it's more frequent, that it happens that a white man would look at a black girl as exotic. Do you think that was happening at the same time?
And then you also have the power dynamics of the older woman and the younger man versus the older man and the younger woman.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine that you would think that there's more demonization of men attracting younger women than the converse, right?
That always irritated me when I was in my 20s and 30s, seeing these guys that were 50 and 60 years old coming down and dating women out of my pool. Hey, hang on here. You're supposed to be up in the 40s and 50s with your own.
Well, maybe they just had a little more swag or something. Or probably a little more money.
That could be.
At the very least.
I do know one instance when I went to hear a blues band play, and the guitarist came out into the crowd, and he was like moving around through the crowd. He was on a wireless, and he grabbed my girlfriend's finger and used her fingernail as a pick in front of everybody.
What concert was this?
It was, it was like a blues band in a bar.
Okay, so not like a famous...
No,
okay.
Nothing like that. But there is still that thing about a black musician has a certain sort of, like you said, swagger,
allure. Yeah,
and a certain allure. Yeah, so that happened.
Yeah, and how did that make you feel?
I don't have anything to worry about.
Oh, okay. Well, excuse me then. Well, very good. Another part of the Bob Watts book I wanted to bring up is more tied to his musical journey. So, he does make it to NEC, the New England Conservatory, eventually, but he has to do auditions, and then there's summer festivals that played a huge role in his getting into that school after graduating high school. And, there's a lot of money involved with that. And he talks about how he would go hungry some days because he just didn't have lunch money at some of these festivals or X, Y, and Z. And his horn teacher, his horn professor, sort of facilitated some of the money things. Mm-hmm. After he talks many times in the book about how his teacher would just very frustratingly pull two $20 bills out of his pocket and slam it on the table for him to go buy this or go catch this train or whatever. And while it may have been frustrating for the teacher, that I'm sure that meant the world to him in the moment, and then as his story proves, he wouldn't get where he was going without that help, and it just makes me think about the big hurdle that is money and that is finances when it comes to becoming a professional in classical music.
There's also another hurdle, and that is the family one, because he said that when he was first starting out and he was putting in a lot of attention toward the horn, his father was saying things like, that's an instrument for the thin-lipped white folks. And that's so how do you get over that?
Well, and that's specifically is a trope that I've heard with my own ears. So in my beginning band class, and shout out to Ron Turner, the person who started all of this classical music nonsense for me. There were two black girls in my in my beginning band class. One of them was named Ashley, so shout out to Ashley. I forget the other girl's name. She's a woman now. But he talked about how he wanted them to play the horn and how in his day band directors would always say, "Oh, well, black people can't play the horn because their lips are just a little too big."
God.
So that is, but anyway, so and they played the horn and they sounded pretty good, as Bob Watt did. His whole career has been surrounded by the horn. So yeah, that specifically is definitely a trope in music education and classical music that I don't know. I think it might still be floating around today. Another part of the of Bob Watt's book that stuck out to me. So when he finally did win his audition with the L.A. Phil, he said people were very cold to him. A lot of people didn't really want to talk to him. And one of the few people that reached out to him at first and welcomed him into the orchestra was a guy he described as an Asian violinist named TK. And that violinist said, "Oh, it's so great that you're here. You got to get more colored folks into this orchestra."
That C word?
Well, this was the 60s. He won that job in, I think, 63 or 64.
Okay.
But what stood out more to me was, even in the most in the most best intended way, this guy was making Bob Watt the representative for black classical musicians. And that's something that, even today, black folk like myself deal with that. And I'm happy to be a, to offer my perspective, but I can never be the spokesperson.
Right.
I can, black folks are not a monolith,
Right.
and so you can't make that assumption. And that's one of those big challenges. But he made it into the orchestra and we talked about this a couple of days ago, how he would meet black folks in the LA area who would come to concerts and stuff. And I had to flip through the book to find the phrase he used. But he said most of the black people he met were trying to achieve second-class white citizenship. So what is that phrase? What comes to mind when I say that phrase, second-class white citizenship?
First off, that's a phrase that I have used in exchanges that I've had with cousins.
Oh, really? Tell me about that.
Because, well, this was when the marriage equality thing was going on, and I was still up on Facebook, and one of my cousins wrote that she was very concerned about me because I said that our state was on the right side of history when it came to marriage equality.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the phrases that I used in the back and forth with her, was that I am against anything that creates a second-class citizen. Anything that puts somebody at a level beneath somebody else just for color of skin or sexuality or the amount of money that they make or whatever it is. That's just the phrase that I would use.
Yeah.
I don't like second-class citizens. I don't like people being made to appear as a second-class citizen. So that rings a bell for me. That's a dog whistle, I guess.
Yeah.
Me.
And really, sometimes I think, I want to shout out my homie Titus, who is down. He's principal oboe of the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. One of the many incredible black classical musicians out in the world doing the good work. He talks a lot about how some conversations like these need to be more in-house, need to be for black folks to have. And sometimes I think the second-class white citizenship conversation is one of those, because it's really easy for black folks to consider ourselves successful when we have managed to do what the great white man has done, like join a world-class symphony orchestra, and how we don't have to validate ourselves through that. That's one of my biggest challenges with people. Classical music is the line of work I happen to fall into because in 7th grade, shout out again to Ron Turner, I signed up for band, and that turned into a career for me. It wasn't me trying to achieve, as Bob Watts said, second-class white citizenship, as much as it was me just trying to make a living doing something that I enjoyed doing and want to do. So Bob Watt talks a lot about that challenge as far as meeting, black folks in the Los Angeles area that were, not trying to be anything else but themselves, because at the end of the day, that's what Bob Watt was doing. He was being himself. Back to that, and we're going to get to Cameren, but I just have a couple more teasers for this book, because I think if you're listening right now, you would really enjoy reading it. He talks about after he got that job with the LA Phil, there was a time when he was, just sitting in the warm-up room, practicing. And, back then, the guys wore pretty tight pants with the bell bottoms and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
and he recalls the story of that white fascination with the black body and black sexual organs when someone in the orchestra walks in the room, comes in, takes the belt buckle of his pants and starts jiggling it up and down so that you can see how big his is. And the guy goes, "See, look at this guy. Look at how well endowed black folks are." And in the book, Bob Watts says he puts his horn down and puts that guy in a chokehold, and he never had a problem with him again. But excuse me. I'm getting choked up thinking about how hard I was laughing when I read
You don't
that
do
scene.
that. You don't grab somebody's.
But anyway, but that that is his story, and he ties that with race. And I think it was really brilliant how he early on in the book he talks about how the guy sitting on the stoop said something along those lines, and how he dealt with it as a high schooler, and then all the way into his career. The last thing about this book I want to sort of shout out. He talks about how so he won a job as assistant principal horn. So that means the principal horn plays all the solos and does all that, blah, blah, blah. He did get opportunities to play principal horn later down the line, but the music director at the time, and I hate so much that I'm forgetting his name because he's a conductor that we play all the time. Bob Watt in the book talks about how this music director didn't too much like the idea of too many black principals. And there was this percussionist who came through who was black, who was going out for principal timpani. So in an orchestra, being a percussionist and being the timpani player, those are two different jobs. And how he sounded so great on timpani, and how the music director just did not want him to be principal timpani. So he played percussion, and he held that position for all of his career. His name is Rainer Carroll. Excuse me.
It worked out for him. He's got cymbal endorsements. And...
but did it work out for him? He wanted a position as principal timpani, and according to Bob Watt and many other musicians in the orchestra, his auditions and the way he performed on timpani were phenomenal. But the music director just did not want a black man in that spotlight. Principal timpani is one of the major positions in an orchestra, especially when you're talking about some of those, we were talking about some of those romantic era symphonies. So when you hear like Beethoven 5, for example, the timpani player is a main character in that story. And so I don't know if it was a win for Rainer Carroll. He got to stay with the orchestra, just not in a position that the music director thought he should be in. So that speaks to keeping black folks corralled in certain places, making sure that we aren't in too many positions of power and X, Y, and Z. So, yeah, if you're listening right now, I highly recommend that you pick up the book Black Horn. I read it just through my Kindle app. You can buy it on Amazon. You can also order it. The story of Bob Watt, the first black horn player, the first black member of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Today, I chat with Cameren Williams, who wrote a much more lighthearted book. This isn't about sex and scandal and race. It's about how to take care of your musical instrument. So you said, Scott, when you were younger, you were a percussionist. You were a drummer in the band at one point, to a degree.
Yeah, if you want to call it that.
Were there any? Did you learn how to take care of a snare drum? How to change the head out appropriately? How did you get any of that?
Nothing like that. It was a rental.
Yeah,
and I don't know if I took good care of the drum, but I didn't take very good care of the case. Because I was scrawny. I was pushing the case everywhere. I would,
Sure.
I'd push the drum around inside its case, so it got pretty dinged up and scratched.
I mean, and that is what it is, because kids just don't know how to take care of their instruments. I'll bring up Ron Turner one more time. He told me, if you don't take care of this bassoon, you're going to have to get your own. And I'm telling you, they're tens of thousands of dollars, and your mommy and daddy don't want to do that. So I took care of the bassoon that was lent to me. But Cameren Williams, who teaches, she's a student at Juilliard, and she has her own organization, her own foundation that deals with music education and diversity and all that sort of thing. And one of the big problems she saw was that kids didn't know how to take care of their instruments, specifically their stringed instruments. So she wrote a storybook about 4 instruments: a violin, viola, cello, and a bass, that left homes where they were being abused. The instruments left abusive homes, and how they find new homes with kids who know how to take care of them. So the meat of the book is the instruments saying, well, you don't need to, twist my peg too tightly, or you don't need to do X, Y, and Z,
Right.
just as a way to teach kids and their parents how to maintain these instruments that the kids are bringing home, the first year they sign up for orchestra. So I chat with Cameren about, writing that book, that process, her life as a student. And yeah, it's a really cool conversation that I was glad to have. So here it is. Cameren, it's such a pleasure to talk with you, and congrats on Kinderlute. That's a really phenomenal achievement for you.
Thank you so much.
And before we get into the book and all that sort of thing, I want to talk about another one of your phenomenal achievements. You are a Juilliard student. That carries a lot of weight in itself. What was the day like when you got that letter or got that phone call when you found out you were going to Juilliard?
Well, when you apply to Juilliard, you do everything through a portal, and so they'd never send you emails when there are updates to that portal. You just kind of have to keep watching out for it. And so I was practicing in my room one day, and I remember it was just me and my mom that were home. My siblings and my dad weren't home yet. And I got a text from my friend who's also a violist at Juilliard. She's a year ahead of me. And she told me that Juilliard should have updated the portals now and that I should look. And so I put down my viola and I looked at my portal and all I read was congratulations. And I threw the phone down and ran to my mom's room. And I just remember the house being really dark and she was asleep. And I jumped on her bed and I was like, "Mommy, I got in. I got in." And she was half asleep and she was like, what'd you get into?" I was like, "Juilliard. I got into Juilliard." And she was like, "Great." And then she went back to sleep. But then after that, I just ran across the house and it was such an amazing moment because Juilliard has been my dream school since I was maybe 10. And when I got into, senior in high school, I'd met a few Juilliard students by then, and so I really wasn't sure if I would get in or not. And so, yeah, just in that moment, I was so excited and proud of myself.
Yeah, and you mentioned your mom. So many folks like us, Black classical musicians, are first generation musicians, first generation college grads. But it seems like you come from a family of musicians.
I do, yeah. My grandmother, she is a pianist, and I think she also sings a little bit, but primarily a pianist. And my late grandfather, he was a vocalist, and my dad, he's a scientist, but he sings a little bit. And my mom, she plays all the wind and brass instruments, piano, she sings, but I think her primary thing is music history. And my brother and sister are now involved in music as well. My sister, her name is Music, and
Oh, wow.
she plays cello and she sings. And my little brother, EJ, he just started playing violin about a year or so ago.
Wow. Well, do you think you could have possibly ended up at Juilliard without that family reinforcement? Because for me, as a 17, 18-year-old, I didn't really even have a concept of a conservatory, but it seems like you must have if Juilliard was your dream school.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Of course, there are people at school who may not have that support, but I think a place so high level and prestigious as Juilliard, I don't know how I could have done it without my family being there for everything that I do and really pushing me to be the best that I can and supporting me whenever I had a hard time with something, but
Yeah.
still, keeping it real with me.
Right, yeah. and I'm going to keep it real with you here in a second, but but I want to hear about life in New York. What was that what were those first few weeks like living in the Big Apple, living in the big city?
Well, I'm originally from South Florida, so
Right.
New York City is completely different from South Florida. South Florida, the traffic is nice and it's so sunny all the time, and they're
Mhm.
compared to New York, there are barely any people anywhere. But I think being first being when I was first living in New York, being a part of like orientation helped a lot because there were a lot of trips we took out into the city and like in groups, so you didn't feel so alone. But then
Sure.
also it was nice since I mean we're in college, we can pretty much go wherever we want, whenever we want.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice, sort of venturing out into the city because. I've been to New York City before, but usually like with my parents or like as a school trip. So it was nice getting out there on my own, like with friends, and just really exploring and I don't know, not exactly not having a care, but just feeling more like an adult.
Yeah.
I know it was definitely a culture shock with just being around so many people all the time, but for me, that's one of the things I love about New York. I like being around so many people, and there's always something to do at any time of the day or any time of the night. I remember there was one time during the school year, um, I went to bed really early just because I was very tired, and then I
Mm-hmm.
woke up and it was like I don't know, it was like 1:30 in the morning, and I saw that there was like a movie playing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go see this movie. And so I went to the movie theater, and there were tons of people there. I mean, if I didn't if I didn't know it was like 1:30 in the morning, you couldn't have mistake it for like being the middle of the day.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, New York is absolutely incredible. I love it.
When I was really beating the block and doing all of my practicing and, spending 6, 8 hours in the practice room, this is when I was living in Los Angeles. So, of course, there was the temptation of wanting to go to the beach or do
Hmm.
whatever. Do you ever feel like focusing in on your practice is a challenge, living in the city that never sleeps?
Honestly, not really. I mean, my throughout my years in grade school and at home, my mom has always instilled this work ethic of time management in me. So, I mean, I I really want to go out and do all these amazing things, but I'm like I go to school at Juilliard. Like
Yeah.
I've got a lot of work to do. So, I try and set up a daily schedule for myself. So like I'll wake up at 7, get ready and be in the practice room by 8 and practice for like an hour, go to my classes, get lunch, practice again, go to more classes, do my homework, and then I'll be in bed hopefully between like 10 and 10:30. And I really don't get to go out into the city until the weekends,
Mm-hmm.
which is how I set up my own schedule. Just because during the weekdays a lot is happening, and by the time I get to the end of my day and I actually have time to go out, I'm just already so beat. And I think during first year of college is when a lot of people really struggle with that. So yeah, it was definitely hard at some times, but I just kind of remembered where I am, the people I'm around, and I'm like, I gotta stay on top of my game, otherwise I'll be left behind.
Well, you speak about it in a very confident voice, so it sounds like you have it all handled and taken care of. That's really great for you.
Thank you.
So I said I was going to keep it real with you. I'm going to keep it trill. So, one of the things I've dedicated my career to at this point is really dismantling some of these long held traditions in classical music that may not speak to minority populations and that are upheld by major classical music institutions. Now, if there's any institution that can uphold any sort of tradition within classical music, it is Juilliard. As a student there, do you feel like you're in an equitable space? Do you feel like you're in a safe space where you can really thrive as yourself and grow as your own musician?
I think in some aspects of Juilliard, absolutely. In most aspects of Juilliard, excuse me, absolutely. People at Juilliard are very incredibly supportive, especially the academic teachers. Actually,
Hmm.
yeah, it's very interesting. They're so involved with like in our music, the music portion of our time at Juilliard. They love to come to our concerts. They like to hear about our teachers and our lessons. And I mean, although they're always on top of us about our academic work, um, they like to sort of the I mean the courses themselves already melt together with the performance aspect of our lives, but our teachers really, really enforce that melding. And so they'll compare things with like theory or music history to whatever we're doing right now, which is very, very helpful. But of course, there are like some personal struggles that students go through at school, that teachers don't take into consideration, or they do it like obliviously. So sometimes it couldn't even be their fault. They just aren't thinking about it, or like especially the older teachers. But then also a lot of teachers are very, they're very woke about this sort of thing in classical music where not everyone is represented. And so some of them are very considerate about that. They're very real about it. They talk about it with us. And other teachers, you can, obviously most people know about this like discrepancy within classical music, and you can tell it's just kind of awkward for them to bring up. But it's not, it's something a lot of us go through. And so I think Juilliard in general does a very, very good job of making sure we all feel included in that. We all have resources. They try and make it available to all of us. And so I applaud Juilliard for that, because I feel very safe and very supported there.
That's so great to hear, because it's so important for an institution like that to do that and sort of move us into the future. But you mentioned your academic teachers, and I guess I'd actually never thought about that. How is music incorporated into your biology class or your literature class?
So by academics, I mean most of our courses are, of course, involved in music. We have theory and ear training and music history, but we only have one liberal arts class a semester. And so honestly, I think the liberal arts classes are very interesting, but I don't know, they're sort of weird at the same time. Like this past semester I took a class called Society, Politics, and Culture.
Oh.
And so we learned a lot about Aristotle, and we talked towards the end of the semester, we talked a lot about just what was going on in the news and how we felt about it. And next semester I'm taking a class called Ethics, and that class is like more Aristotle and Socrates. So yeah, it's very interesting, and even those teachers are even interested in our musical careers. And we somehow, with the things we're talking about, you think it wouldn't be related to music at all, but honestly, we relate it back to music all the time. Which I guess is like inevitable because we're all musicians.
Right.
But yeah, those classes are very interesting, and the way we connect things between that and music, I think, is interesting as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure it must be so validating to, have music reinforced in your non-music classes. It just kind of makes classical music all that much more relevant and that much more topical,
Yeah.
So I first met you at the past Sphinx Conference. You participated in the Sphinx Tank, and for folks listening who don't quite know what that is, it was sort of like Shark Tank, but music-based projects that you were pitching to a team of investors. What was the process for that like? How did you begin to form a budget and be prepared to answer questions from investors?
So my uncle is actually a lawyer, so
that helped.
yeah, he sort of helped us going through that process. I mean, because I literally don't know anything about entrepreneurship or publishing a book or anything.
Sure.
So it was very important that I and my family gets all the help that we could get going through that process. So yeah, my uncle just sort of explained the budget and everything to us, and as far as getting ready for like actually pitching that idea, the idea of Kinderlute, and being ready for those questions, I sort of just went up to anyone that I could and pitched that idea. I like the whole 10 minutes, I think it was. And then I asked my mom to my mom, my dad, my uncle, and just everyone in my family to think of questions, like absolutely anything, the hardest questions they could possibly think of,
Mm-hmm.
and ask me after I did my presentation. And we did that a couple times. And me personally, I think I'm getting better at talking to big crowds, but this I was extremely nervous for. It was so nerve wracking, this whole process building up to the actual moment. I definitely had a few breakdowns along the way, but yeah, I think without that preparation, it would have gone a very different way. And I think the confidence that I had when I was up there wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, you definitely seemed very confident, and like you
Yeah.
knew what you were doing. You seemed like you'd done it before, even.
Oh, that's good.
I guess you had, considering the practice you got from your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you came up with the idea for Kinderlute, was the topic of instrument maintenance always what you thought would be most important? Where did the content for the book come from?
So the story itself is just something my siblings and I made up as we were writing the book, and getting ideas for the book. But like the damages that happen within the book are things that I've definitely dealt with in throughout the time that I've had my foundation, working with students elementary school aged throughout my community here in West Palm Beach, and the connections that I have to the elementary schools.
So this
So
was
yeah, the
like
story itself.
real world problems that you were trying to solve here.
Yeah, definitely. And I you want it to be relatable
Hmm.
to students. So if a student reads it, they're like, "Oh, my friend did that before, and now I know why not to do that and how to prevent that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever make a? Do you remember tightening your bow too tight, or I
Oh
forget.
yeah. All the time. I don't know what it is with little kids and just tightening that bow, but
or turning the pegs on the instrument, and oh goodness
yeah.
gracious, wow. And you talk about the book needing to be relatable to the kids that you're reaching out to. And the first time I read Kinderlute, it was very noticeable to me that the images of the children in the book represented diversity in a big way, even
Yeah.
even all the way down to the names you give
Yeah.
the instruments. I mean, how did you come to that conclusion? Again, was that just based in making sure it was relatable?
The colors of the children in the book was very, very important to us, because I think, I mean, any book a kid reads, they want to, they want to seem like sort of involved in the book,
Yeah, see
And so,
themselves. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so writing a book where the kids are able to see themselves in it was very important. I know growing up, I didn't read very many books where like the kids looked like me. So it was like, I don't know, it's sort of like watching something happen. And so with this, it's like, oh my gosh, that little girl looks like me. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
can definitely do this. And I think especially within classical music, specifically, within this profession, there's, I mean, any place you go, you might be the only, I might be the only little brown girl with dreads.
Sure.
So, I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, I know that story.
yeah, it's definitely something I wanted to make sure this book had within it.
So you talked about the students that you work with in West Palm Beach and your foundation. I actually don't know anything about your foundation. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, my foundation called Camene Strings, conjunction of my first and middle names,
Mm-hmm.
is a 501c3 organization, and basically we collect donated instruments, violins, violas, cellos, and basses, and we repair them with whatever has happened. And if we don't know something about the repair, we'll definitely look it up and definitely try it out until we get it. And then we donate those instruments back out into elementary schools and after school programs and youth orchestras within the South Florida community, and now that's starting to actually expand. But yeah, that's basically the groundwork of what we're doing. And then now we're trying to get more into bow repairs and larger repairs and making instruments. So that's something we're trying to branch out towards now.
What's the worst shape you've seen an instrument in, as far as what your foundation does? Has a has a violin or a bass been completely split in half or something dramatic like that?
I think maybe the worst is like the bridge was on backwards, all the strings were put on wrong. Like there was a peg, it was where it was supposed to be, but it was like broken in half or something. And I don't know how that happens. But yeah, what I have no idea how some of these like kids do this to the instruments. And it's like some damages you can see like, oh, that's okay. I can understand that, but other things that like I don't understand.
And we're using all of these, vocabulary words, bridge and peg. For if there's someone listening who has no idea what we're talking about, do you think you could just go from top to bottom on a string instrument and describe all of the different parts that you talk about in the book?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the very top swirly thing at the instrument, that's called the scroll, and that's also where the pegs are held. And so pegs are what we use to tune the instrument if it's like extremely out of tune. And then the strings, obviously the strings, and underneath the strings, the black is the fingerboard where we play and lay down our fingers on our left hand. And then we get to the body of the instrument, which is the actual instrument where some people may hold it, which just a little tidbit's not good for the varnish. um, and then we have the F holes, which is also, it's shaped sort of like an S, but that's actually how they used to write F's in like the medieval period, I think.
Or like you'll see the forte symbol shaped.
Yeah, yeah. And then the bridge is the little wood piece that holds up the strings at a certain level. And then the tailpiece is where the strings come into and where also your fine tuners are, where you can tune the instrument if it's only just a little bit out of tune. And then for violins and violas, we have chin rest, which is where we rest our chin whenever we play. And if you have a cello or bass, they don't have a chin rest.
Right, because you're not putting it under your chin; it's on the floor.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm thinking more about, when I think about the family of stringed instruments, I come back to thinking about your family. You have so much support, but there are so many parents out there with kids who are coming home with this stringed instrument that they know nothing about, that they have no idea how to, tell their kids how to maintain it or take care of it. Other than buying and reading Kinderlute, what would be your advice to those parents?
So I think my parents sort of went through this same thing as well, and they just sort of learned as I did more things. They were always very curious about the things that I was doing with my instrument. So, because, I mean, they both sort of know about string instruments, but, string instruments is not their primary thing.
Right.
So whenever I'd be, like, wiping down my instrument or just, like, using my pegs or anything, they were always like, oh, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And I know my mom actually, because she played violin, but when she was like very little, and when I was growing up, I was very scared of the pegs. I never even wanted to touch them. I barely looked at them. So she actually learned how to change my strings for me. So she was changing she was changing my strings for me for quite a long time. I think probably up until like maybe late middle school, early high school. Yeah, she learned how to do that. Without like having that sort of like training herself. So I think my advice would just be to stay curious, always ask them questions. I think the question why is a very important question to ask anyone about anything. But yeah, just stay curious and ask questions.
Hearing you talk about the early days of your violin playing, I guess I didn't I realized I haven't ask you how you got started. How old were you when you started playing, and how did that happen?
So I actually started playing piano when I was about
Okay.
2 or 3.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Whoa.
And my
Two or
mom
three.
actually taught me piano. Yeah. My mom taught me for a little bit, and then I think she taught me for maybe about 3 or 4 years, and then from there I learned piano on my own.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started violin in school when I was 5, and I didn't get lessons until I was 7 or 8. And then I actually started voice when I was about 7, with the choir we have here in our community, the Young Singers of the Palm Beaches. And then I actually started viola when I was 11,
Okay.
and I didn't want to switch. Like viola was supposed to be like a hobby for me. I was like, yeah, I play violin, but look, I can play viola too. Isn't this cool?
Sure.
But then in 6th grade, we had solos and ensembles here in
Mm-hmm.
middle school. And so I asked my teacher if I could do both. And she said yes. So I did a viola solo and a violin quartet. And she heard both of those. And I remember walking back to the orchestra room after my solo, and she asked my mom if I would audition for the advanced orchestra on viola. Because in 6th grade, I was in the intermediate orchestra on violin.
Yeah.
And so my mom said that she had to ask me because it was my decision. And so the next week, my orchestra teacher called me into her office and asked if I would be able to audition for advanced orchestra on viola for my 7th grade year. And I sort of looked at her because I wanted to say no, but she said I could think about it. So I went home, thought about it, and I decided to audition for advanced orchestra on viola, and I got in. And so I switched completely my 7th grade year when I was 12, and I just sort of didn't have time for violin anymore because I got a lot more opportunities on things on viola. So I guess it was sort of like an accidental switch, but it definitely
Yeah.
worked out well.
Or serendipitous, maybe.
Yeah.
So what's next? I mean, you have a foundation. You're a published author. You're a Juilliard student, a violist. I mean, it seems like sitting in an orchestra would be too small of a job for you, or maybe that is what you hope to do one day.
Yeah, I definitely want to maybe start an orchestra just to get on my feet, but ultimately I would love to like travel the world and sort of do I definitely want to do chamber music. Ideally, I would like to travel doing string quartet and just performing around the world, and hopefully have like Kinderlute and for different instruments and in different languages in order and spread that around the world. And then once I've settled down, I want to teach at the collegiate and elementary school levels, and I would love to have like a physical location attainable for people for Kamine strings. I would love to expand it into some sort of like pre-college program where you can get lessons, and there's orchestra and chamber music, and you can get instruments, and you can get your instruments repaired and sort of, but everything is like at an affordable price because
Yeah.
something that I've realized progressing throughout my foundation is that so many things in classical music, as you get older and as you get more advanced, it's just like it sort of gets sort of further away and harder to get. And
Yeah.
so I want this physical being of Kamine strings to be attainable for people, and sort of like a source for resources for a bunch of different things. And not only that, but like summer festivals and
Yeah.
college help. And I would love to make that happen at some point.
Well, it sounds like you're well on your way. So again, congratulations on everything you've accomplished, and good luck for the future.
Thank you so much.
Before I let you go, how can people buy Kinderlute, and how can they find out more about you and your work and contact you?
So Kamine Strings does have a website. It's just kaminestrings.org. Or you can go to kinderlute.com, and if you want to purchase a book, they're on Amazon, or you can go to the Juilliard store website. But if you want to get 10 books or more, you can contact us directly at admin@camenestrings.org. And if you want to know anything else, our foundation number is 561-215-9671. And you can definitely find me on social media. I have Twitter, I have Facebook, and I have Instagram. If you type in my name, it should just come up. I know I have multiple different Instagrams, so there's one for the foundation, Camene Strings, and I have one for music, and that's Camene Bratache. So,
then,
yeah, you can...
And is there a separate Instagram for when you're partying and stuff?
Yes, that is. Yes, there's a private one.
Well, yeah, I'll let you keep that one to yourself. Yeah, talking about people wanting to order 10 or more books, that has me thinking about the idea of orchestra classrooms having a set of these books.
Yes, that's definitely our goal. We want that to happen.
Wow. Well, Cameren, thanks again. I really appreciate you spending the time, and once again, good luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Cameren Williams in conversation with Garrett McQueen here on TRILLOQUY.
Yeah, I could never have done what she has already done at her
so
age.
Early. I mean, she's talking about having this book published, and she's in Juilliard, and she's got all these...
She has her own foundation.
I mean, I have to go back. If I could go back in time, I'd have to go back and all of a sudden have a whole bunch of accomplishments because I didn't do shit.
And, the important thing to note here, I think, is, we always talk about access, right?
Yeah.
She her race doesn't play so much of a role in lack of access or anything because her parents are both musicians and music teachers. And she had that foundation. And then, of course, in the interview when she's talking about preparing for the Sphinx Tank interview or that pitching, which, by the way, you can watch. She has that posted on her Kinderlute website when she talks about how her uncle is a lawyer and how they were practicing and stuff.
Yeah.
So you just cannot overlook just how important some of those connections are for people.
When she got into Juilliard, she goes running in to wake up her mom and tell her, and her mom's like, "Oh, that's nice, baby."
Yeah, you're like, "Child, I'm trying to sleep."
Anyway, I knew you were going to get in there.
But shout out to Cameren for that for that really great interview. If you just Google Kinderlute, KINDERLUTE, the first link that pops up for me is her website, so you can learn more about her there. And,
you also have to look a little bit further for the Classical Kids Story Time, which features Kinderlute and you doing the voice. You're the dramatic interp in this one. So
I think that was my first voice acting gig.
Visit yourclassical.org and look for Classical Kids Storytime Kinderlute.
Before we head out for today, I just wanted to touch on one thing that Cameren was talking about. She was talking about how in the book it was important for the names of the kids and even the colors of the kids to be more representative of who she is and where she grew up, and the importance of reading a book where you can see yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that experience with anything you had to read in school or maybe in college, really connecting with a character or characters in the book?
I did, but it wasn't due to the fact that we were the same race or the same sex or anything like that.
Well, what was it?
Have you read The Stranger?
The Stranger. I don't think I know that one.
By Camus, Camus.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, you'll have to look it up. It's absurdist. It's right along the line of Vonnegut and everything like that. Which I guess that's more a testament of where my headspace was when I was a junior and senior in high school.
Sure. Yeah. I read a lot of Vonnegut myself, and I saw myself more, though, and not in a Vonnegut book, but a short story by Kafka. What's it called? The Metamorphosis? I think.
Yeah.
Like when I read that short story, it reminded me of waking up one morning and trying to tell my parents that I was gay. Like I might as well have been a giant roach.
Good point. Good point.
So being able to see yourself in literature is really great for the kids with Kinderlute. For a lot of folks coming up, we began this opus talking about Black Horn by Robert Watt. I'm sure a lot of people see themselves in that story, coming from poverty and trying to work your way up. Maybe having that substitute teacher or that regular teacher that's trying to get in your drawers or whatever. So
trying to hook up.
Yeah, we need to do better as a society about reading books. I feel like my generation, if there's anything we don't do as much as we should, is reading. And I'm talking about what's on pages, not reading in shade, of course,
right?
Because we already do too much of that.
What's coming up next time?
You're ready to go, I see. Okay. On the next opus of Trilloquy, it's going to be Moving Through Gateways Part 3. So I talk with my homegirl, Jen Arnold. She spent many years as a violist with the Oregon Symphony over in Portland, Oregon, but is moving to the opposite coast. She's moving over to Virginia to get into arts administration. And just how, in my story, I felt like the work was bigger off the stage. That's how she felt. So she talks with me about the Gateways Festival and how it relates to diversity and inclusion, and how she plans to bring some of those stories into her new role on the opposite American coast.
Next time on Trilloquy, remember to visit our website. It's TRILLOQUY.org. Send emails to TRILLOQUY@AmericanPublicMedia.org.
And one last happy birthday to the Queen Bee herself, Beyonce Giselle Knowles Carter. Happy birthday, Queen.